As those that are here on time. Why don't we go ahead and start the recording, and ooh, don't know if we have a quorum to vote on the minutes, but I have some changes on the minutes anyway. Okay, so welcome to the April 29, 2022 meeting of the Local Control Advisory Board. We are here as part of our regularly set meetings to move forward the mission of the Local Control Advisory Board. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Wendell Pete France, who is going to talk with us about one of the models of local control. So we'll be turning that over to him in a moment. But first, I just want to welcome you to the meeting. Let you know we're ready to move forward with the legislative process and the external meetings. Just need to kind of get some dates on calendar for the external meetings, but we're ready. With that, I want to hand it over to my co-chair, who, although I haven't seen her in this space, I did see you on social media attending a really important meeting earlier this week. And so just want to say congratulations on the investments that are being made in West Baltimore, and hand the floor over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I just like to believe that all the work kind of works together to make Baltimore better. Thank you, Mr. Pete, for being with us today, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
Great. So first up, we do roll call. There's only 10 of us on, so why don't we just introduce ourselves, and as more people come in, we'll give them a chance. I'll announce them if I can see them. So for the record, Dana Moore, co-chair.
Ashia Parker, co-chair.
Ray Kelly.
Ray Kelly, community member.
See, City Solicitor Shea.
Jim Shea, City Solicitor.
And Kaylin Young.
Good morning, Kaylin Young, community member.
Thank you. I saw Mark Washington.
Mark Washington, community member.
Good morning, Mark. Tyler Adamson. Tyler is here.
Tyler Adamson, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Tyler. Natasha Mayhew.
Good morning, everyone. Natasha Mayhew, Director of Government Relations for Stop.
And Adam Abadir.
Hey everyone, Adam Abadir, Mayor's Office of Government Relations.
Welcome, everyone. Next on our agenda is the approval of minutes, and I do not believe we have a quorum to approve the minutes. We can't take that action, but let me ask whether anyone on the call has had a chance to review the minutes, has any edits, changes, corrections. We can at least consider those. And table.
There wasn't any mention of the sort of questions that I raised last time.
Okay. So we'll figure out how to record that, Tyler. My view is that minutes are intended to reflect action items. And so I didn't think that there was an action related to your question, but let's talk about that offline, and we'll figure out what amendment needs to be made. We're not going to vote on the minutes today, for that reason, but also one of the things that I think is helpful is if we have just a little bit more formality in how we list members, because we're here with certain profiles, portfolios. So I'd like to have those reflected in the minutes. So I'll be making those changes. So with that, let us welcome Mr. France, who is going to talk with us about his experience with one of the models of local control. Natasha, do you want to do an introduction, or Mr. France, would you be okay just introducing yourself, and then we can fast forward?
Sure. I can. Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me, just to hear what I think or my opinion Let me just say, I'm first and foremost, I'm born and raised in Baltimore City. I became a member of the Baltimore Police Department in 1970, and I served for 27 years, retired in 1997, and began to do some other things in policing in this community prior to my retirement and since my retirement. And so around 1998, 99, I began working as a consultant for the Justice Department, dealing with what you now know as a pattern and practice investigation of discriminatory policing. I worked for them until around 2015 or so. I did about 13 cities, just dealing with the investigation to determine if the department that we looked at represented a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing. So I worked with them in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, California, Riverside, California, Oakland, California, Schenectady, New York, Detroit, Michigan, and several others to look at the patterns and practice of policing. Out of that work, I simultaneously worked for the state government, for the state of Maryland, off and on, and had a brief period of time where I managed a police oversight agency in Cincinnati, Ohio, an agency that was created as a result of litigation, as a result of a settlement between the parties and the city to set up an oversight agency to investigate police complaints of police misconduct. And so I left that experience, went back to state government, and subsequently retired as the Deputy Secretary for the State Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. So I've done these things simultaneous. Also became a adjunct professor both at Coppin, University of District of Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and Bowie State. I'm currently on the faculty of Bowie State and Coppin. So I bring to this experience around 35, 40, 45 years of experience in policing. And I have grown to become sort of an advocate of community control of policing, but not in the sense that I think you are looking at. And I'll explain why as I talk to you this morning. So that's my background. That's who I am. My kids are here. Well, two of my kids are here. Two of my kids live out of state. So I have 4 children. My son is a realtor. So that's my son, Dave. He's a realtor. And then I have a son, a daughter who works here in the city. When I looked at the mission that you were trying to address, I had some questions of my own, because I want to be clear that we understand the language that may become, I guess, misinterpreted based on the person's reference. So you're called a control board, and you are being tasked with creating or looking at models to bring about community control of policing. But is that clearly your mission? And so when we look at the terminology that you use, there are 2 types of police models two types of terms that we use. One is control and one is oversight. There's very few police departments in this country that are absolutely under the control of the community. But there are over 100 police departments or better who have some form of community oversight. And oversight often comes as a result of some legislation that requires that the police department share certain information with the community, or that the community has some sort of review board of police complaints, or that the community is engaged in some sort of establishment of parameters in which police conduct their business. That's not control. And if you want to know how difficult it can be to engage in oversight, just look at what occurred in our state Monday and Tuesday with your new legislation requiring the Attorney General to do these investigations and the sheriff in Harford County deciding that he had a different opinion of the legislation. So I want us to be clear that you are embarking on an area that's not been that's unfettered. No one's done this in the way that I think you're trying to do it. That's number one. And number two, you have to factor in all of the issues that relate to control of a police department. So let's look at Baltimore historically. Baltimore has always had a form of oversight. You may not know that, but early on in Baltimore's history, before the power of the appointment was given back to the mayor, there was a thing called the Complaint Evaluation Board. And that board was set up. I believe it was a part of the solicitor's office who managed it, but all complaints of police misconduct were forwarded to the Complaint Evaluation Board for review. This was a process that was in place for decades and seemed to be a relatively seamless process, with the exception of the appearance of politics. So as you begin to discuss control, or as you begin to discuss oversight, you have to be mindful of how that may look in this environment. You mentioned St. Louis, and I'll talk about St. Louis in a minute. But let's talk about another department that had a police board that was in control, and that was the Los Angeles Police Department. Los Angeles Police Department, going back to 1920, had a police board, a board that was supposed to be in control of the Los Angeles Police Department. And after the Rodney King incident, some of you may remember Rodney King, the Christopher Commission wrote simply that the police board, the Los Angeles Police Board of Commissioners, were at best illusionary, because the mayor of Los Angeles, or the mayors of Los Angeles, had simply usurped the power of the board in their appointments of the chiefs, and then giving the chiefs of police the authority to overrule the board's decision and so forth. A lot of this information is buried in the details of how these boards function. And so after the Christopher Commission rendered their report, and then the Justice Department went back into Los Angeles the second time. Remember, if you know the history, the DOJ went to Los Angeles 2 times. Once in the early Clinton administration, and then afterwards, at the end of the Clinton administration, they went there twice and finally did a pattern in practice, and found that the Los Angeles Police Department was in fact operating a police department that had discriminatory practices. And so having a board, having a control board, having a board that's supposed to be responsible for the police department, control of the police department, comes with a lot of challenges, And so what my entry into this discussion is to sort of tell you that first you're embarking on something that probably hasn't been done in the way I believe you're trying to create or want to create. And secondly, all of the issues that have to be addressed in that process. So the mayor became the appointee for the police commissioner in 1978. The legislature, the state of Maryland, gave that responsibility to the mayor. Prior to 1978, that responsibility rested with the governor. The governor appointed the police commissioner in Baltimore City. Well, why was that in place? Well, prior to in the 1920s, I believe, the state of Maryland took control of the police department from the city because of corruption. And they still had control of the police department, with the exception of the appointment of the police commissioner, which they relinquished in 1978. And Mayor Schaefer at that time made the first appointment of Frank Battaglia under that new legislation. Control. What do we mean by control? Well, if we look at St. Louis, and St. Louis is not the city of St. Louis, it's the county of St. Louis that created this control board. They specifically articulate that they have control. They appoint the police chief. They approve all policies. They have a great deal of oversight over what happens in that police department. But the people who serve on the board come from the elected members of the St. Louis County governance. The county executive and the county council make the appointments of the people who serve on that control board. So while they articulate that they have control, that control is somehow fettered because they are all in some way or another appointed by an elected official. The other part about the St. Louis legislation is that the folks who get appointed have to come with certain criteria. A resident of St. Louis County for so long, must be a certain age and so forth. That's normal for any government board, that you have some of those parameters. And so I looked at these different models, not so much as to suggest one to you, but to sort of help guide your thinking about really what do you want to do. Remember, after this 90s and all the uprisings we had around police misconduct, we saw all these agencies create these oversight models, but no model ended up with control. And thirdly, and I don't know if Bob Cherry is on the line today, you must be mindful, no matter which model you create, you must be mindful of the impact of labor and the impact that these agreements, these collective bargaining agreements, have on the conduct and administration of your police department. And so to simply say we're going to just create this, and I saw that in the legislation, it says that labor, the agreements that are in place will remain in place. Well, if you are managing or controlling the police issues, you must be mindful of what your labor contracts have said about what your authority is as relates to conditions of employment, promotions, testing, and so forth. And so I can answer questions. I want to just lay that out as a foundation in my introduction to you, so that it's sort of to whet the appetite about what is it that you really think you want to do, and then how do we help you get to that place. And finally, I forgot to mention, I'm a member of LEAP, and LEAP is why I'm here. And so I don't want to not acknowledge my participation in my work with LEAP for the last several years with Neil Franklin and all the folks that we have at LEAP who try to tackle some of these difficult issues in our criminal justice system. So I'll stop there, talk about 10, 15 minutes, and see if there are any questions about what I've said so far.
Sure. Let me take chair's privilege and start by first thanking you for that excellent overview. I think some of us have bits and pieces of that, and I know certainly Solicitor Shea has a lot of the background of how the police department has shifted legally over the years. I don't want to forget to recognize Lydia Walther Rodriguez has joined us. We are awaiting Lieutenant Elliot Cohen to join us. He will be here in place of Bob Cherry. Bob Cherry let me know last night that he couldn't be here. But again, thank you for that excellent overview. My first question is, could you just tell everyone what LEAP stands for, LEAP?
I'm sorry, Law Enforcement Action Partners. We are an organization that somewhat operates outside the traditional thinking of how we manage these systems that we call the criminal justice system. So we're judges, prosecutors, police officers, mental health professionals, all together talking about these challenging issues that confront us.
Thank you very much. And then thank you for your incredible many years of service and the knowledge that you're sharing with us this morning. In the time that we have been convened as a group, I am not, we're not monolithic. There is not, I don't think, one view that we all share about what the way forward is or even should be. And I think that was really intentional in the way that this board was crafted. We are called the Local Control Advisory Board, and we do have a pretty large mission. But what we don't have is unanimity and singularity of thought. And so your being here and sharing these different views is really, really helpful. We're going to get there because we have to get there. We have to get to a majority view of what we should be. We're not there yet. So I just wanted to give that overview, and then I'm going to pass it over to my co-chair, Ashia Parker, to see if she has any opening comments, questions, and then we'll open up for questions from the full board. So Ashia.
Yes, good morning again, Mr. France. I just had a question to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay, so we are the Local Control Advisory Board, and we are tasked with making sure that things are in place if Baltimore City is able to have local control. But you do understand that we're not trying to have control. We are facilitating the city to have control of the police department.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. That was it. I just wanted to make sure. Yes, we're researching different models that we can recommend for Baltimore City to have control over the police department.
Okay. So let's see. Anyone, any member of the board have questions? Or
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Chris? You know, Ray, I can always tell when you have a question.
My hand is up.
It's
but
your hand. Oh, well, it's not that. It's your hand on your chin.
Well,
Mr. Kelly.
I've actually met Pete and Neil a few times back in the day, 100 years ago maybe, but I wanted to elevate the same issue that Ashia said, that I think our task as written is to explore different options of local control and present a ballot question for the upcoming election to have the people vote on it. I think oversight, as has been demonstrated throughout our process, is not going to be in our purview. I've kind of brought that issue up since the beginning, because what we're actually doing is establishing agency in Baltimore City, and then the oversight and the administrative structuring piece would have to come next. But like Tyler and like you mentioned multiple times, that control word leaves a lot to question when we're actually speaking of creating a new agency run by the local municipality.
Yeah, I understand that, and clearly, is what I wanted to demonstrate was the clarity in the language of what you're trying to recommend, how you see yourself, how you get to the point where you have something to offer, that there's a distinction, or there should be a distinction between control and what you determine control is versus oversight. And oversight could be some form of control, but clearly there have been plenty of agencies created throughout policing that deal with oversight. But the issue of recommending, creating, looking at what community control is has really not really been something that has a lot of people even tried. And so we have to be mindful of that. That's my point.
Right. And I think we're not to that point of community control exploration yet. Right now, we're just talking municipal control, local control of the agency itself. And hopefully then we get into oversight and who this police department becomes accountable to.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And I agree. We are not that entity. We are simply the bridge to it. We are not it. Other questions? Any other questions? So I do have one other question. I know that Mr. France, you share that you're not here to make a recommendation, but my question is whether or not in all your years of experience, is there a methodology or a system of management, oversight, control, whatever word you want to use, that you have seen to be the most successful in terms of recognizing political responsibilities, legislative responsibilities, responsiveness to community? Is there a model that sort of hits all the marks of what I think is, and this is just me, what I think is important for a police department to be?
Not really, and let me explain why. One of the fundamental questions that we tend not to be able to gain some consensus around is, who are the police? That's one. And what do we expect them to do? That's two. And until there is some agreement about who are the police, and I don't mean who are the police physically, I mean who is engaged and who have we given permission to police our communities. That's what I mean by who are the police. What does that look like? And then what do we expect them to do? So if you ask people, what do you expect the police to do? They'll talk about things like, keep me safe, come to my home when I need the police, solve problems, arrest bad people. And so it becomes very expansive about what we expect them to do. So to create a model, we would first have to have a great deal of understanding about who do we identify as the police, and then what is the mission. And when mission, I mean core mission. And if the core mission is strictly law enforcement and containment, you will always have segments of the community that are either disenfranchised or not satisfied with who the police are or what we expect them to do. So there are bits and pieces of models that you see. Several years ago, a group called Policy Link did some work around this issue, but the transformation of that, who are the police and what we expect them to do, has to be from a broader, holistic perspective about the community at large, about delivery of services at large, about all of the entities that impact the community, mental health, education, the courts. They all have to be in alignment with how we police a community. And we don't seem to be able to get there. And so I've often thought, please don't throw anything at me because I'm a retired police officer, but I often thought that the institution that we know should be abolished and we start over. Well, we just can't do that. We just can't abolish an institution because of its interrelatedness to the fabric of the community. So if we can't abolish it, then we have to have some way for the community to have access to how they're policed and who polices them. And I think that's the better way to go, that the community has input, access to how they're policed and who polices them and what are the priorities. Ironically, the priorities for policing in one community are not the same in the next community. And do we allow the police officers to adjust based on priorities? And thirdly, we want to keep this in mind. Right now, and this is not a criticism, this is an observation. Right now, we teach police officers what? We take them to the police academy, 26, 30 weeks, and we teach them how to deal with defensive tactics, driving a car, writing reports, understanding the laws of arrest and probable cause. And we spend our 26 weeks dealing with them around the issues of managing law breakers. But the majority of people police officers interact with every day are law-abiding citizens. And we give them an hour of this course and 2 hours of that course, and then we send them out. But the skills we gave them are to deal with law violators. So every citizen, in some sense, and I'm not just talking about Baltimore, I'm talking about the profession, has to look like a law violator because I was trained how to deal with that. And so that whole concept, so when we talk about what model would we use, we have to look at really whether the structure that we currently have in place meets our purpose. And so that's why I say, no, I don't know of any one particular model, one particular style of policing that would address how we're trying to come to this decision about what we recommend to the community. And I hope I answered your question, Dana.
Yeah, you did. And even if we were in person, I would never throw anything at you other than maybe some shade. But yeah, because we're not talking about abolishing. We're talking about, and if I might, I mean, we're really talking about making better the relationship between police and those who are police, which is really all of us in some form or fashion. Even, you know, as we are law abiders in there and we interact with the law violators. And my question now is, we have a consent decree that has been in existence for, correct me, it's 4 or 5 years.
5 years.
Everybody's got their, 5 years. And the BPD of 2017 is not the BPD of 2022. A lot of progress has been made. And I know, Ray, I have this debate in my own house is, how do the people of the city feel that progress? How are they interacting with it? But the fact of the matter is there's been a lot of progress. And so my challenge as the co-chair of this board, I understand our mission, but I also recognize so much of the progress that's been made that we simply can't we can't give up ground. We can't pick a model that causes us to retread, go backwards. We have to keep going forward because I feel very much on the right track. One of my, the thought of having a drastic change, given, the path that we're on and the good that's happened is, you really got to think about it. And at the end of my speech, I'm going to recognize Trey Murphy is here. Welcome, Trey. Elliot Cohen has joined us. Welcome, Elliot. Any reaction to that? And really what I'm asking is, have you considered the role of the consent decree and the impact of the consent decree, and all of your experience and how that mushes all together to spin out a model that could be workable for Baltimore City?
Well, as I said in my introduction, I've done a lot of work helping the Justice Department to determine if an agency was participating in a pattern of practice of discriminatory policing. And I've watched consent decrees, and I've worked with several monitoring teams around the issues that are embedded in the consent order. But the consent order is to bring the department into compliance or into some sort of consensus around discriminatory policing practices. It is to reduce, resolve, eliminate those practices that may exist in the department. Very rarely have I seen, and I've worked in a lot of cities around these consent orders, Very rarely have I seen there be a holistic change in the relationship between the police and the community. And I think that's because, and I'm not criticizing the consent order process or the Crime Control Act of 1990. That's not, because the consent order is specific in its intent. Now, there may be segments, paragraphs in the order that speak to community engagement, better community relations, better training, better transparency, but I have not seen that those issues result in a holistic change in the manner in which the city, the community, and the police department interact. And we have cities where the consent orders have expired. And some of those issues may still be prevalent. So my hope is that in Baltimore, my city, that we do something different. That once we meet the requirements that are set forth in the many paragraphs of the consent order, that we come away from a different relationship between the community and the police. And one of the best ways to do that is to ensure that the community has some involvement in the administration of the policing agency, and that it be people that are representative of the entire community, not segments of the community that end up being selected by certain groups. The other thing, and I'm realistic, you have to have some clear way to sort of a bridge against the overreach of elected officials in policing operations. And if that doesn't happen, the models are gonna become conflicted, because the ability of someone or some agency or some group to impact on what happens. And I'm not saying that would happen here. I'm saying you have to be mindful that you don't want to create something, you don't want to recommend something that still has the potential of having influence, undue influence from an outside entity, be it labor, be it elected officials, or be it based on economics in the city, what we need to how we need to structure the police and their budgetary constraints and those types of things. So that's where I come from.
Okay, that's really helpful. One of the things that I've observed in my previous roles, and even just as a citizen of Baltimore, regarding the consent decree, is the oversight of the federal court and the role of the Department of Justice, and making sure that the changes are codified in policy, written policy that is then approved by the federal court, and that makes them sustaining. They are the policies that BPD adheres to. Have had the opportunity to see those new policies in action, in real time when challenges arose, and being an observer of how the policy is reviewed, considered, discussed, and then BPD acts. And it's really marvelous that that's where we are. So I personally feel strongly that the policies that are in effect now, that are codified by policy and approved by court, will sustain and will continue on. And I hear what you're saying regarding the engagement with the relationship with the community, and the importance of that. I've been talking a lot. Let me see if there's anyone else that has questions, any follow-up with
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Sure.
And I apologize, I'm at a conference, so there's a little bit of background noise here. But I did want to just take a couple of steps back, to the original discussion, a little bit about control versus oversight. Growing to a bit of an understanding that right now, the Baltimore Police Department is an instrumentality of the state of Maryland. But however, with that, there is considerable power that the mayor and the police commissioner have for the police departments. And I think a lot of the discussion has been, in like when we're talking about models of control or oversight, bringing in the council into that process. So just your thoughts on, one of those, if we term it as a model of oversight or control, the council right now can't pass legislation in regards to the police department, but that would be one of the things that we are looking to have achieved in our approach to local control. So just looking to get some insight on that, because I know you mentioned in some other jurisdictions it's set up a bit differently with their oversight or reports.
I believe in the St. Louis County model, and I'll use the term St. Louis County. Their model has a role for city council to review issues that come through that board. And so not just the policies, but they make recommendations. The board makes recommendations to the council that are reviewed. I don't know if that's the case in most other agencies that use that form of model. But also, you mentioned the authority of the mayor and the police commissioner. What I've seen over my history in Baltimore is that the mayor, not this mayor, that the mayor and the police commissioner have sometimes not exercised the proper power and authority that they've had over the police or over the police department, and subsequently don't take ownership when things are not things don't work out. The department that you're working with now, just quite frankly, is not the department I retired from. Things were done a little different. There were different accountability models. There were different requirements to be in leadership, and you're trying to reinstitute some of those things, but rarely would you see that the type of engagement you see now between the elected officials and the police department. Rarely would you see that, not just in Baltimore, but in most police departments. Now, most people say, well, it's good. Part of the consent decree, Dana, allows part of why you see these policies creating this engagement with the community is the community is being asked. The community has a role in how this consent order is being managed. That's what you will need that consistently. You will need that consistently in looking at policing strategies and policing models. So not just the creation of the policies or the community outreach, but in actual how police departments operate. Who gets hired? What are the qualifications? What is the policies on use of force? Do we have pursuits through the city? All those policies, the community needs to have a role in assessing and to determine if they make sense for the community. And so that's one of the reasons I think you see the traction from the consent order is you have these subgroups and committees all around the consent order where there are community residents, community folks weighing in on what the police department is looking at doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. France. Any other questions or comments? So hearing
Tyler
none.
Addison has his hand raised.
Oh, okay. Tyler, thank you for that. Tyler?
Hi, thanks. I just had a question about regarding the consent decree. One of the things that I worry about is that when consent decrees are created, I say this not trying to be make it as dramatic as it sounds, but beholden to what policing looked like in 2017 and what the conversations were then. So I'm wondering, are there in other places that have had these consent decrees, have you noticed when they fulfill the response or the tasks and the things that they need to meet in order to grow out of that? Have you noticed that those policies and those practices are already outdated? I'm thinking along the lines of, I know that like a lot of the conversation previously, in 2017, 2018, 2019, was around anti-bias training and body worn cameras, and I think evidence has shown that those have mixed results. So I'm worried that what that looks like in 2017 is not what public safety will look like in 2022 when we're sort of navigating the next steps. Sorry, that was a little all over the place, but I'm happy to clarify.
No, I understand what you're saying. While the consent order may have been signed in 2017, the conditions for compliance are based on best practices that exist today. And so there may be some, and the city solicitor or someone else may be able to maybe weigh in. There may be some compliance issues or some issues that were in the consent order that may have changed. The expectations may have changed because there may be some new practice. So it's not simply what we saw in 2017. It has to do with whether the policies that's created and the changes that are being ordered help reduce what we call unconstitutional policing, and that's the nexus of the consent order, that we eliminate unconstitutional policing or the pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing, which basically come from citizens' interactions. There are a whole lot of other things that the consent order will require or that will cause to happen, like equipment, facilities, issues around officer safety and wellness. They all will come out of that, but they may not necessarily be specified in the order in such a way that they require compliance. Then you have to look at the order to see, based on what the order stipulates, how has the agency met compliance, and what do we call compliance? And that's important to understand. How have they met compliance in those specific areas? I serve on the review of policy, training policy committee, and there's been a great deal of energy around how training is administered in Baltimore. And so, but they have not come into full compliance with all the training requirements that are in that consent order. So you can gauge the progress and how they're training, but then that requires that you have a longer academy or have more modules to teach. So there's downsides to a lot of what we're doing, but I think that the expectation is that at the end of the consent order, that the department is not practicing, does not have a pattern of practice of unconstitutional policing.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Did I hear Solicitor Shea?
Yeah, I think Mr. France has it right. I think that's exactly what the process is. Standards are embedded in the Constitution, and there are lots of things that have to happen to get there, but it'll be what the situation is when we finish, not what it was when we began.
Okay, well said and understood. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question. Hey, this is Adam Abadir. Thank you again, Mr. France, for being here today. And just kind of taking a look at some of the things that you said over the course of this meeting. It sounds like the LAPD model before, the mid 90s had a police board. And it sounds like it was comprised mostly of police officers. And then you mentioned that St. Louis County has a control board with appointments made by members of the board are appointed by the council and the mayor in St. Louis. And I've heard you mention in both those instances, there seems to be a core concern you've raised about, both the need of having independent community input and also kind of a concern about, shall we say, you said, I think the word used was fettered control through, political trends that may come and go, electoral trends that may come and go. So I have an all police board that has some issues. I have a appointed board that has some issues. I'm wondering if there are any hybrid models that you are aware of that you could recommend that kind of get the best of both worlds, or if there's some other ways that we should be thinking about the makeup of this board that will oversee policies for BPD.
Now, let me clarify a point. That Los Angeles board never included police officers. These were all citizens appointed by the mayor. So they were all citizens with a chairperson, and then they had a staff. They hired an executive director. They had a staff to carry out the functions of the board. So I hope that clarifies that neither were those boards composed of police officers. Both of those boards had citizens as the oversight or as the police persons who were responsible for managing. No, I don't know of a hybrid model. I just can't think of a model where there's a mixture of the two. Most community boards, most oversight organizations consist of citizens. The board that the organization that I ran, that I led in Cincinnati, again, we're all citizens. They elected a chairperson, and I reported. I was appointed by the mayor of Cincinnati, and I reported to the chairperson of that board. Now that chairperson would change. So I would report to a different person if there was a change in the appointment from the mayor's office. Someone dropped off the board, someone moved to another location. But I still had the day-to-day responsibility for managing the agency and doing the work that the agency was tasked to do based on the court order that created the agency. So I'm not sure if there's a hybrid model that exists.
Thank you.
Any other questions? That was a good question, Adam, and I was wondering the same thing. Any other questions? I do have one more, if you have time.
Sure.
I have been watching St. Louis, and I believe someone from St. Louis will come talk to us soon. But one of the things that I've noticed is they did go to local control, and I believe there is still local control today, but there's some discussion about reverting back to state control. I'm just wondering if you've been watching that, if you have any thoughts on it, does that give us any sort of intelligence that we should be paying attention to as we navigate our process?
I've not watched it. I'm familiar with the creation of that how that organization functions, but I've not watched it. And that's one of the things that we must be mindful of, that the winds could blow a different way, and people not be so engaged, or not be desirous of having citizens actually engaged in police matters. I just believe there's no other way to function than to have, and I spent most of my life in policing. I just don't think there's any other way to run a police organization without having some citizen inclusion and decision-making about how that agency is run. And who the citizens are, of course, makes a profound difference as well. So I just think that we need to be mindful. It's interesting though, Baltimore City and St. Louis City are the only two cities that operate outside of a county. So Baltimore City is not in a county, and the city of St. Louis is not is not in St. Louis County. It's a separate county that's called St. Louis County, and then the city of St. Louis.
Right, and I guess the the history of the jurisdiction that is known as Baltimore City, the corporate entity that is the mayor and city council of Baltimore City. I'm going to leave that. I kind of left that in an office down the hall from Jim Shea, and I'm not going to pick that right back up. But in terms of the jurisdiction, we are where we are.
Right.
We operate the way we operate. If I might, I'm going to share with you what I think the main deliverables are of your presentation, which I am so thankful. I really think the main deliverable is what you just said, that in your view, as we think about local control, there must be a model that includes citizens having some role, and what that role is and who the citizens are is to be defined, but that citizens have some role in how the police department is run, that there be robust, and that's my with how policies are set, how policies are carried out, and there has to be a real decision about what it is we are asking the police department to do in terms of policing and community engagement.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I don't.
I had one last question.
And who's
Sorry,
that speaking? Oh, Tyler.
My hand
Yes,
was up.
Tyler. All right. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, sorry. In terms of the outline that Adam sort of shared with us, is there your thoughts on sort of like statutory authority in terms of calling witnesses, subpoenaing information and witnesses, those sorts of things? Is there sort of a best practices in that area as well?
I think you have to be mindful as you structure or you make recommendations for what the structure looks like. If they're going to have, I just think they need to have full bore of access to information, and sometimes it may have to come through subpoena or a request for certain documents, and they need to have the legal authority to exercise and create those situations or engage those situations.
Okay, Tyler, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. France. We really appreciate all the time that you've given us. Please stay connected, stay tuned, and absolutely, as we go about our work, we'll soon be engaging with the community actively. And if you see or hear anything that you feel like we need to be redirected in our direction, feel free to let us know. Reach out.
I will.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate the opportunity. You guys have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Great discussion. So moving next on the agenda, I'm not sure we still, I still don't think we have a quorum to vote on minutes, but in terms of the next meeting, upcoming meetings and important dates, I just want to share, we are making a little bit of progress in connecting with folks from St. Louis. Hope to be able to bring someone here to talk with us in the next week or two. We'll work with Natasha and Adam to schedule our next meeting. I don't know whether we can get it on for May 6th. May 13, I won't be available, but if we're able to schedule for May 13, we have a guest, I'll defer to someone else to serve as, guiding us through. But stay tuned for next meetings, and Ashia and I will be organizing with the two different committees to move forward that work so that we can actually do the community outreach and start looking at some proposed some draft legislation. Any questions, comments before we adjourn? Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here. And you will hear from us very soon. Thank you.
Everyone have a great weekend.
Yes, this Saturday is the mayor's cleanup day all over the city. So be on the lookout for that work.
See you.
All right, take care.